This is with the Economic Development Districts. This is our inaugural town hall. We've approached this in trying to be productive for everybody, broken our town halls into four different groups, one being the ISPs, one being towns and counties, one being nonprofits, and then the fourth being the Economic Development Districts. You're welcome to attend any of the four throughout the month, and I think our External Affairs Office does a great job of trying to communicate when those dates are and how to join those meetings. This is our inaugural, so we'll try to get through this one. We are very open to the feedback around. We want to make this time productive, as I had said, for everyone. But this is really communications we feel is core to our tenants in the office of transparency, accessibility, and ease to work with. So we'll continue through these and try to give you updates on the office, the program, funding, and any new updates that we have just in general to expanding broadband access here in Nebraska. I think next slide, Rachel. Oh, and I should mention, we'll have plenty of time at the end of the slide deck to do some Q&A, and so if questions come up, note them and we'll come back around to them at the end. But to kick off the state of the office, we, as most of you know, we are budgeted to staff 9 individuals. We're currently staffed at 6. That would include one remaining position vacant in our External Affairs Department and 2 vacancies remaining in our Grant Administration Department. So if any of you know folks with that background and skill set, I believe the grant administration is still posted. I don't know, Rachel, if you could confirm that the vacancy in your office is open.
We are actually in the process of interviewing, so it is not open right now.
Okay, so if you've got folks that have an accounting background, good with numbers, that kind of skill set, definitely encourage them to look at the position. Great group of people to work with, and I think an opportunity, particularly for folks coming into that profession, great opportunity to get some experience. I think it's been 2 months now, probably 4 months since we recognized a strategy to do this, but we've transitioned holistically the digital equity aspect of the program into the Nebraska Broadband Office. We submitted, in terms of digital equity, we submitted our initial plan last Thursday, I believe, or maybe Wednesday. We are one of 49 states that got their initial plan in, or 49 of 56 federal entities that have gotten our plan in. We think we've got a strong plan, and we have all of you to thank for that. I brag on you all anywhere I'm at and have the chance to, in that Nebraska's took such a unique approach to how we created our digital equity plans, and I believe it's reflective of the entire state because of that strategy. Whereas I believe, at least not mentioning any states in particular, that in many cases more urban voices from the more urban or metropolitan areas of the state were heard much more loudly than the rural parts of the states. Having broken it out amongst our district economic development districts, I think in seeing the plan absolutely truly reflected the voices from across Nebraska, and I think that's going to pay us dividends as we get into the granting portion of it. I would remind or inform everyone that the NOFO from the federal agency regarding the digital equity program has not come out yet. It's been committed that we will see it yet in 2024, but without that NOFO, we really don't have any guidance in terms of how we move forward. We've got our plan in, but that NOFO is really going to be the source of the direction we're going to be required to take in accepting that funding. And then lastly, the office has been monitoring legislation. We have a number of bills on our tracker that aren't necessarily moving anywhere. I think the one I've been most recently, one or two that I've been most recently involved with is related to LB 61, which is carryover legislation. It would allow electric utility districts to lease dark fiber they have They've invested over time. A lot of dark fiber runs between substations. From an economic perspective, they have made that fiber broad in terms of the number of strands available to them. They obviously don't use all of them, so they're looking to lease that dark fiber to potential ISPs or others that may be able to integrate that into their networks and expanding broadband. This office did not take a position on it. We're neutral. We gave a lot of counsel to the administration and to the legislature for sure around it, but we are currently neutral on the position. I believe that's sitting on select file right now. I don't know of a date that it will be scheduled to be heard on the floor under select file, but it was a spirited debate in first reading, so I suspect that debate will continue. The other one was LB 1336, which a provider introduced the bill. It was conceptually would have brought the broadband bridge funding over to the broadband office. So the $20 million appropriated by the legislature each year that PSC is currently administrating would come that, again, conceptually within the legislation. That money would have been brought to the broadband office and administrated by the broadband office. That bill has gotten a hearing. There's not, in my mind personally, Patrick's mind, not a ton of momentum behind it, but we would have supported the bill. There's a lot of efficiencies gained by bringing that money and allowing the Office of Broadband to administrate it just based on the program we've built to administrate BEAD. So we'll see where that goes. I think next slide, Rachel. So the state of the office, continuing. We've been working really hard on our branding. I'll give as much credit as I can to Rachel and to Trevi and the improvements made to our website. So if you haven't visited the website in a while, I would encourage you to do so. I think it's night and day to what we may have seen a year ago today. It's very organized, I think extremely easy to navigate, and I think reflects the image and the branding that we want to project out of the office. Also, we've tipped our toe into social media. We've launched ourselves onto Facebook, so you can follow us on Facebook. Trevi and Rachel and team will do a lot of updates through Facebook. We're currently promoting a lot of our information around the challenge process and trying to engage the make them aware initially and engage the public in helping us through the challenge process by identifying inaccuracies on our map. And then just promoting all things challenge related in general, not just through Facebook, but hopefully a lot of you have seen the updates and the information being provided through the office to all of you. And then I had mentioned the website updates. Again, that's something where we really want to reflect Nebraska in this and reflect the office's role in Nebraska's broadband efforts. So if you've got some feedback on how we're branding ourselves, what we're sending out in terms of communications, again, communications is key to our tenants. Please don't hesitate to provide the feedback. We're always open to that. Next slide talks about the challenge. I think to update you all on that, as you've probably followed the bouncing ball, we've pushed out our date twice now in terms of our expected opening of the challenge window. The first real delay was related to receiving our written approval from NTIA on our volume 1. That was a gateway in order for states to be able to open their challenges process, was to have the written agreement, a written approval on volume 1 from NTIA. We've gotten that. We received that, I think, last week as well. So I congratulate the entire team. I think when I accepted the appointment, we were, the NTIA, give you a little context, has a dashboard where I believe they felt it was encouragement for states to continue progression, but it really rates each of the states in terms of where they sit on that progression. And I think we ranked in the 20s when the office really first got its start and momentum. And as of this morning, I was informed we are sitting tied for second in the country in terms of where we are in regards to the evolution of the program. So I commend the entire team for all the hard work that went into getting us towards that top. If I were sharing this with the governor, and when I did, he would say, "Well, what's it going to take for you to get number one?" We'll continue to work on that, but there is also somewhat of an upside to being number two. They always that saying that the second mouse gets the cheese. Having some states out in front of us isn't necessarily a bad thing, as we get to see some of their ideas and see some of the directions they're taking, and really leverage those if they're great ideas. But I am very proud of the fact that the office is number two in the country in terms of how we're administrating and progressing towards getting them getting to the next steps in the process. Currently, with the challenge process, we are looking at a new date of March 1st to open that window. I think I've described kind of how we've laid out the challenge process, and it really aligns with NTIA's suggested process. There'll be 30 days to accept challenges, 30 days to receive rebuttal from the challengee or challenger, the individual entity being challenged, and then 30 days for the office to adjudicate those challenges. In other words, come to decisions on whether we will support that challenge or will decline on the challenge. Rachel has the advocate slide up right now. This is something I'm sure you're seeing a lot of communication from our office around. You all qualify as an advocate. We really encourage you as our partners, and have been partners in this since the beginning, to become an advocate for us. Being an advocate, again, some of this has been discussed before with all of you, but the NTIA, and I say their infinite wisdom, but there was probably, I can support some of the reasoning for it, but they limited those that can actually access and submit a challenge to the challenge portal to 3 entities, and those would be nonprofits, local communities and tribal leadership, and then the last being ISPs. And so with that limitation, I feel the NTIA has really hamstrung us in getting a significant public engagement in this. I suspect that without more of our advocates and more of our encouraging communication going out to the public and attention and awareness to the opportunity, that we're going to see the majority of our challenges here in Nebraska come in from ISPs. I'm guessing 95%, but I talked to a colleague last week in I believe it was Virginia that has closed their challenge window, and 75% of their challenges came from ISPs. So if all of you haven't and are interested in doing so and becoming an advocate, Rachel has directions, and our External Affairs Department has directions on how to become an advocate, and they are always available to have conversations in the event those instructions don't get you to where you need to be. There is a licensing requirement because the background provider of the underlying map data considers that confidential data, so they require a license just to ensure that your allowance to access that data, there's some conditions around it, and they know who's in there should it potentially be manipulated or taken in some way. But I encourage you to do that. I look to Rachel and Trevi to tell me whether I did my part in the rah-rah about it. But again, if you have any questions, we're available, but the directions are laid out really well on the website. All right, this is probably the biggest news of the slide deck, and I still question whether or not it's accurate, but we've taken the last month to rerun it several times, and the numbers are coming out consistent. So we're moving forward with it. The significant changes in the numbers in Nebraska were just so significant that there's definitely an excuse to have doubt. So if you think back to, let's just say, summer of this year, the numbers we were sharing with folks were right around 111,000, 105,000 after different updates in terms of the full population of unserved and underserved homes in Nebraska. Our unserved population in Nebraska is right around 70,000, if I remember correctly. The FCC refreshed the fabric and distributed it in November of last year. We received it and put our GIS and mapping folks to work on incorporating that into the Nebraska map and updated it. And at the time of going into that refresh, excuse me, I'm sorry. Going into that refresh, we showed 717,601 served locations in Nebraska, meaning that those broadband service locations had access at that time to speeds exceeding 100 megabits down and 20 megabits up. In terms of our underserved population, we showed just under 30,000 households had access to broadband speeds that were greater than 25 and 3, but not access to speeds greater than 100 down, 20 up. And then the unserved population, as I mentioned, was right around 50,000 for those that did not have access to broadband speeds of greater than 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up. Fast forward to November and today, our numbers in Nebraska are showing that we now have 773,000 broadband serviceable locations that have access to broadband speeds greater than 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up. We now have dropped to just under 9,000 underserved locations in Nebraska. And the big number, we have dropped down to 15,000, roughly 1,677 specifically unserved locations in Nebraska. So those are significant progress in terms of what our remaining mandate is here in Nebraska, and great news for the state of Nebraska. I'll share how that impacts our office in relation to that same timeline I just kind of laid out. We, as you all know, are going to accept roughly $405 million in order to meet the mandate of ensuring that all broadband serviceable units in Nebraska have access to speeds greater than 100 down, 20 up. We believe that was about half the amount of money we needed to get to the unserved populations. We didn't expect that we would have any money left over to get to underserved or much less community anchor institutions. And with this significant drop in the number of locations, we think we can now get to unserved, underserved, and potentially some community anchor institutions with the $405 million we have. And that's without future rounds of Nebraska Broadband Bridge Program funding, those kind of things. So it's incredibly great news for Nebraska. I think the first question that we all asked, okay, so what made up this significant improvement? And to be clear, the majority of our significant improvement in Nebraska was a result of enforceable commitments, meaning there was a lot of other money coming into the state for the purposes of expanding broadband access to broadband serviceable locations in Nebraska. And that's primarily what it is. So this, there isn't, I can't say that these numbers, if you go out, are in reality being served today, but the fact is they'll be served within the next several years. And for those of you that follow the details and the programs that are out there, the majority of our improvement came through the announcement of enhanced ACAM. We had of the 18 eligible providers in the state eligible for ACAM funding. Of those 18, 13 of them accepted all of the funding, which means they'll now carry the same charges we have, and that is to get their underserved and unserved homes served. So that was a significant funding source that really helped the overall numbers in Nebraska. It'll take time for that to actually become a reality in terms of being able to call up and provide and ask the provider for those speeds. But I know in some cases construction's already began. That being said, I think next slide, state of the program. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've got our Volume 1 approved. This allows us now to move into our challenge window, which I mentioned we're expecting to begin on March 1st. And I just give kudos to all of you who participated in our community town halls. I know in almost every case I had a representative of the Economic Development District in the room. And your feedback in terms of your comments and just in general is all reflected in Volume 1. That's important to us as we want our program to reflect Nebraskans. And none of this could have been done in a vacuum. So thank all of you for your engagement in the program and in helping us put together Volume 1. We weren't the first in the country to have our Volume 1 approved, but we're, I believe, in the top 10. The process that the volume went through in terms of review at the federal level is robust, and for us to have gotten through it as quickly as we did, although we were anxious about how slow they did it, but it wasn't as a result of the material contained within it. It was more a result of the review by a lot of federal attorneys and that kind of thing. So thank you all for that. the state of the program moving forward. So we've got our initial proposal, volume 1, approved and signed by NTIA. Our initial proposal, volume 2, we've submitted. We've got the initial round of curing is what NTIA refers to as, but it's suggestions on how to improve it. We've got a deadline, an internal deadline to ourselves, but as well as a deadline with NTIA of March 1st. As the team talked about the amount of curing we still have to review yesterday, I think we're going to ask for an extension into April 1st on that. And most likely it will be, that extension will be approved. So in our next town hall, this slide will be updated, I believe, to show April 1st. That does push out some timelines in terms of shot clocks later on in the program, but in my mind, those could be advantageous to us, as we don't want to get too far out and then put ourselves in a crunch when we get to those other shot clocks in the future. And then the challenge period, as we talked about, our goal is to open that on March 1st. There'll be a 30-day rolling clock on the challenges, meaning that challenges can be submitted for the first 30 days. Providers or people that would rebut the challenge can rebut within 30 days of the challenge being submitted, and then we'll have the remaining time here in the office to adjudicate those challenges. I would just mention that I should have, however, in our communications piece, we did make a significant radio buy, statewide radio buy, to encourage the public and encourage your constituents to engage in the process. And there's a lot of information on our website, thank you to our External Affairs Department, around how to engage and what that looks like, and very detailed directions, instructions, and how to navigate our map, and how to seek out an eligible entity to actually submit their challenge. So the challenge phase opening on March 1st, roughly, advocates have 30 calendar days to submit challenges. Rebuttal is accepted for 30 days after the challenge is submitted. And the last day to submit challenges is the 31st. Last possible day for a rebuttal would be April 30th. But we decided early on that we were going to allow rolling rebuttals. So as soon as that challenge comes in, if that entity being challenged wants to submit evidence towards rebuttal, we'll accept that day one. But the rule or the requirement we have to follow is that the rebuttal window is only open for 30 days after the challenge has been received. And then the final determination is through our office is 30 days of adjudication. We intend to adjudicate those on a rolling basis as well, just so that we don't wait until the last 30 days and try to adjudicate a significant number of challenges, where we're going to do that along the way. Then once we've completed all of our adjudications within the office, we will turn over a package to NTIA for final approval of those adjudication positions on those challenges. And NTIA's approval will be reflective of amendments to our map. I point out, just as evidence, this is the one chance we get to get it right. Anything after the challenge process closes, so after NTIA is approved our proposed amendments, we make those changes to our map, and it almost literally locks the broadband serviceable locations eligible for funding in. So if we find that we had 100 locations, Josh, in your economic district got missed and they're unserved, we don't get to go back and say, we now want these to be part of the inventory that will receive funding to be served. It's locked in. The only exception to that is because there's a USDA program continuously funding. There's our own state bridge bond grant program continuously funding. There's over at the PSC, they also still have some capital planning funding that dedicated to broadband that they're expecting to announce awardees in June out there. The NTIA has indicated that there may be a small window for us to clean some things up over the summertime. So it's not that we just don't have the opportunity to wholesale make changes, or in my example of Josh, 100 unserved locations that we discovered after the fact, they're not going to accept any of that. It's going to be all tied to one of those three programs I mentioned that are just in motion and really challenging to be able to predict where those awards are going to be. Next slide. The follow part of that is Shandana and Diane's necessarily. That's where their primary attention and energy has been focused on preparing for the next steps beyond the challenge process. As I've mentioned to all of you in other conversations, Nebraska decided we're going to start with a letter of intent That letter of intent will inform us primarily on the managerial, technical, and financial capabilities of an entity that is interested in becoming an eligible applicant. In the Grant Administration Office's great wisdom, this is going to be a very robust document, but the purpose for that is not only for us to collect and be able to assess potential applicants in a significant and responsible way. It's going to take some of the burden off of the application itself. So it makes the letter of intent that buys you a ticket to get in the door and submit an application. The application will then, doing that will allow us to focus the application primarily on the merits of the project, not necessarily, we'll collect the merits of the applicant in the LOI. That allows us to then focus really on the merits of the project when applications come. But if you're working with your local providers, and we've had the same conversation with all of them and we'll continue to do it, in order to submit an application, you'll have had to have submitted a letter of intent, and then we'll do an assessment in your letter of intent and grant you eligibility status to become an applicant based on the assessment of your letter of intent. So we're trying to be clear that you have to go through the LOI process to actually become eligible for applications. And then our wholesale goal of the team, and this is going to be a very steep climb, is for us to be appropriating grant funds by the end of the year. NTIA will have to approve our awardee selection prior to us being able to announce that, but we hope to have gotten through that process and be able to actually announce and start appropriating funds before the end of the year. A very, very, very lofty goal, but I've got confidence that this team has been willing to accept it, and we're going to work towards it. And that brings us to Q&A. I think actually that's pretty good. I thought the first half hour was a slideshow and the second half hour available for Q&A, and we are just about keeping that commitment. So Rachel, I don't know, raise your hand, just jump in, or how we want to manage this. But if anybody has any questions or thoughts or feedback on anything, this is the time for us to have the conversation. Josh, it looks like you might have a question. No? Wow. We must have done a great job of putting this deck together and sharing the information.
I think it's really well presented. I would just say that in just follow-up research that we've been conducting early in 2024 here, the enhanced ACAM, not overlapping funding has thrown a lot of the wrinkle into the works, right? With the updated numbers as far as served, underserved, unserved that you presented. It's made it a bit more challenging to find those unserved locations, right? And a lot of them are marred by topographical issues more so than population, I would even say, for our region personally. So it's kind of refocused some of our approach as far as how we're handling conversations with ISPs and stuff locally within our region. So well presented. Thank you for the update.
Yeah, no, and the bulk of that improvement or progression was EACAM, and you're absolutely right in kind of following the logic behind that, Josh. It's going to make the locations that BEAD now covers they're going to be more expensive, a lot more expensive. And we, in our modeling and trying to understand how far the $405 million will go, we tried to reflect that logical, progression in there. So I think even with the higher cost to get to those now more expensive unserved and underserved areas, we're still going to get to them. I think, we could be off in our modeling, and proof will be in the pudding when we actually start getting applications and seeing what their modeling is reflecting. But our modeling right now, Josh, indicates we still can meet the mandate and get to our underserved population as well.
How are you guys viewing I want to be careful with my language here, but how are you guys viewing the transition from the former ACAM 1 and ACAM 2 that was out there? And to be quite candid, nothing was being done with those funds by the ISPs that had won those bids. And now they've been redistributed in a way with the enhanced ACAM, which sounds like it's going to be better. but now it steps everything else back farther, right? Where deadlines and achievables were not being met from the awards back in 19 and I think 21 was the other year, if I'm not mistaken. Um, I mean, enhanced ACAM just kind of delays everything else out, and then I start to wonder about the overlapping of funds, trying to address two different channels of need simultaneously. Are we almost a little bit cart in front of the horse at times? But we got to take the funding when it comes. I get that
Yeah.
too. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a conundrum that I've been talking through. So just
Yeah.
curious
Yeah,
thoughts.
no, I think all of that's accurate, Josh. Where I find the upside of it and the downside of it is the fact, and I don't know that you can fault where we were at the time, but some of that, all of that original funding through ACAM funded locations to achieve speeds of 25 and 3. That was the only requirement. And
Right.
as you can imagine, that's what most providers receiving it did. They got so fortunately those folks had some sort of acceptable broadband at the time. But now here we are, where acceptable broadband perception has changed, right? Now everybody's looking at 100 down, 20 up. And this ACAM funding, this most recent ACAM funding, EACAM, is going to fund those 25 3 locations that we funded 5 years ago, is going to fund them all over again to get them to a more adequate speed. And that's a positive thing on the progression. It's just sometimes difficult to look back and say, wow, we spent a lot of money that first round, and here we're coming back to spend a lot of money again. And I think the other thing, your observation, Josh, accurate, is that it's really difficult for us to try to manage all the money that's coming into Nebraska, and ensure our map is accurate to reflect that, so that we don't get irresponsible in our funding and fund areas that are either already funded or have been funded and now built, quite frankly. But, and that was part of the thought with LB 1336, was that if we had, kind of administrative control over at least the 20 million, we could follow that bouncing ball a little bit better than we could trying to coordinate ourselves with the PSC. Granted, the PSC has been great partners, and they have the same goal as we do: is let's not overspend, Nebraskans and federal taxpayer dollars. But it's going to be tough. And then you've got the USDA out there that just announced yesterday they've got another round of funding coming, and
Right.
so it's going to continue to be a challenge. But I think at the office and our relationship with the PSC, we've got a good team in place, and we'll work with the USDA to make sure that they're part of that conversation, Josh. And quite frankly, I think we've got the best GIS team in the country, and they've been very adaptive. That when this new information comes out, even before sometimes the Office of Broadband recognizes that there's new data out, they're on top of it and getting it to us. So it's going to be tough, but there's no way of getting around that. But I feel pretty good about our ability to kind of manage it, Josh.
I have a follow-up question to that then too, because some of the funding that's allocated out is at the federal level and does not mandate state oversight. It's being monitored at, I don't know if it's the NTIA or if it's the FCC level, but some of those funds, where there is federal oversight at a local level for us, is there anything that the NDO is put in place or is talking about? How are you guys following up with some of those federal dollars that are not monitored at the state level to make sure that we're holding the ISPs accountable to meet the needs that they said they're going to be able to meet?
Yeah, the NBO, and I don't know of any other state that's really, other than the capital planning funds, in some broadband offices across the state, they received ARPA funds or they received capital planning funds. They're maintaining oversight over those. But in terms of programs like RDOF, CAF funding, those kind of things, we're letting our agency manage that across for their partner or sister brother agencies at the federal level, Josh. And we get updates on it frequently. I believe they're doing a good job managing across those boundaries. They're working very closely together with each other to make sure that the efforts of each of those individual agencies are being met. So I think the thing you probably won't hear me compliment very often, Josh, but the one thing I have been somewhat optimistic to see is I do feel like those agencies coordinate across each other really well in DC. There's been some very public problems with some of that funding, as you all probably know, Josh. In previous rounds of it, particularly RDOF, there was some really red faces around some of the big winners, and it's really put everybody on guard at the federal level. Nobody wants to be in the position the FCC was after the first, after the round of RDOF funding was made. So I know they are very critical of us, which is why I made mention of our volume 1. There's a significant and robust review process involved, so that doesn't happen. So we're not doing anything, haven't been asked to do anything at the MBO yet, Josh. But I feel comfortable the federal agencies are doing their part in making sure it happens.
Well, and that's where my question honestly comes from, is because, again, in our broad examination of funding sources that have been allocated to the state over the last, 6-8 years, we are extremely disappointed in the quality and quantity of expansion efforts made, through some of the federally subsidized programs that have existed for a longer period of time. We have more confidence in our state agencies, such as the MBO and the PSC, at least kind of putting the pressure on, the local ISPs that are saying, hey, we can accomplish this, to actually bring it to fruition. That's what and that's the only place that my question comes from, is that there's a lot of those programs, like you mentioned, RDOF, that was kind of a mess there and for a while, and hopefully getting sorted now, with some of these modifications and things. But yeah, that was the only reason for the question. It's always tough. The feds are extremely busy at a much broader scope, and I understand that. But obviously we represent a constituency of the state, and so our focus is selfish in that. We want to see not only our constituency within our 13 counties, but across all 93 counties in the state. We want it, realized for everybody. Because we recognize the economic impact it has.
Absolutely.
On a greater scale. And honestly, if you want to go on a greater scale than just our state level, that expands out nationally and internationally with our business and products that are developed here. So that's the only question I had, because like I said, we have a lot of confidence in the NBO and the PSC both, through our dealings with both offices and entities there, that you guys can kind of hold people to some accountability. And so that was the only ask. So
I appreciate that, Josh, and thank you for that confidence. We'll continue to try to earn it on a daily basis, but thanks for where we are with it now. And two, if you want to have some chats offline, what this office, the presence of this office gives us access to federal agencies, otherwise, PSC may not have, like the FCC through NTIA. And, Tom, our federal program officer, can help facilitate that. So if you have something, we want to be all things broadband in Nebraska, right? So just because we don't have a permanent kind of infrastructure set up within our office to deal with RDOF or to deal with some of these other programs, Josh, doesn't mean we can't engage as partners with you or through us to try to get some of that fit. If there's real problems, to try to get some of those problems reported up to the top.
Perfect. Great. Thank you.
And I think I've got 2 items to close on, but before I go into that, any other questions, comments?
This is Rachel Magruder with CNED, and
Rachel.
I just want to say thank you for all of your efforts. You're doing an excellent job. You have a lot on your plate, and you're up and running and making things happen, and just excellent job. I just wanted to mention that. Another thing is CNED did obtain a license for the challenge. And so we're on board there with you. And the other thing I want to say is I just have a question about what is the impact of that ACP program on the BEAD? I know the grant program, that's one of the criteria, I believe, that whoever ISP is going to be applying, they're going to have to participate with ASP. And I know it's in your 5-year action plan. And do you anticipate any wrinkles because of that? Funding has not been approved?
Well, I think in general, and Rachel, thank you for your confidence as well. I appreciate the the words. And I know the team does too. The team works extremely hard. So to get that feedback is, I think, definitely motivation or motivational. ACP, I think the expiration of that program is going to create a lot of wrinkles across the country. I don't know our numbers here in Nebraska, but we kept up in terms of the number of entities that were leveraging that program in Nebraska. We were right at about the national average. So we were, it's going to be significant to Nebraska. In terms of it directly impacting BEAD, it will in a very indirect way, because obviously we're going to go out and provide services to locations that otherwise does not have it now. And undoubtedly, some of those locations we build to, there's going to be a challenge on the subscription side of it, right? A challenge on the monthly subscription to the service. And without ACP, that's going to have an impact on those families' ability to actually subscribe, or now that they have access to actually leverage the service. In our plan, Rachel, you're correct. We require one or the other. One was, as long as ACP is in place, and we put this plan together before there was the reality that it may actually expire and not be in place. But the fallback to that is that any applicant awardee is required to have a low-income program internal to their company. So we didn't set out guidelines around what that needed to look like. We felt that the private market was best at determining how they were going to support the community through a low income and a middle income program. But in order to be an applicant and receive an award, you have to have one or the other.
And I think that's an excellent item that you incorporated into that volume 2, into that grant program. And actually, it may be even more effective because it's more streamlined. It takes out that middle piece, a couple of pieces actually.
Yeah.
And so maybe it's not such a bad thing that the ASP is frozen. It may just create a lot of other affordability programs that the ISPs are more connected with and provide more oversight. And like I say, I think it may increase numbers for affordability programs because of the ease of it, So, yeah.
My experience, Rachel, having come from a very, very, very large provider, is they started to look at that program not only as investment in their communities, but also in terms of how do they encourage those individuals in their community that can leverage it? How do they, really bring that to their attention and help them walk through it? So I don't expect to see that change in terms of the larger providers. And I've been in my travels across Nebraska and all the opportunities I have to meet with providers in Nebraska, I've been just so blown away by their commitment to their communities, the smaller providers. I don't want to call out one or the other because they all offer unique programs, but it is with the intent of really supporting their community, engaging their community, and invest in their community. And in other states I've had responsibility for in other chapters in my career, Rachel, that hasn't necessarily been about the approach. I'm really proud of that in Nebraska. I think that reflects Nebraska, and I'm glad to see it's alive and well. So I think, to your point, the impacts, they're inevitably going to be there, but I think with our spirit and our approach in Nebraska, we're going to solve them.
Okay, thank you, and again, thank you for all you do. You're all doing an excellent job. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Anything else? Okay, I think the final 2 points I would mention is back to the challenge process and all of yours engagement in it. A lot of folks have kind of been fearful of the traditional approach. I think we're all trying to visualize, and that is one of your constituents walking into your office one day and saying, I need to submit a challenge, and here's all the evidence I have to support the challenge. I just don't expect the reality of it's going to be that that's going to happen all that often. So I offer this as kind of a different angle to look at this at, and I think could be very, very valuable and helpful to the overall effort. And that is for all of you to have access into the portal so you can see the challenges that are posted by let's say by an ISP in your area. you all have a really good boots on the ground knowledge that we don't have in the office on whether that's an accurate challenge to have submitted. So in other words, the simple one is an ISP submits 30 challenges for 30 locations in Gage County, let's say. We may not have any evidence to rebut that. There may be nobody that comes back around and says, no, this ISP is not accurate in saying these 30 locations that show unserved on your map are actually served. And I think you all from your seats and having the familiarity with your locale can be one to come in and say, whoa, wait a minute. I know the ISP doesn't serve those sort of 30 locations because I live in one of those locations, or I know people that live in those locations, or my office has gotten feedback from the people that live in those locations. And so you can be a rebutter. And I don't know that in all cases, our advocates are thinking of it that way. So I just wanted to kind of post that out there to say, I think that, if it's not the person walking in your door to have you submit a challenge, it's looking at it from the other side and saying, wait a minute, I can see this challenge now, and I don't believe this challenge is accurate. And then the last thing I'd say, again, we're going to continue to do these on a monthly basis. We'd really appreciate your feedback. I think it's invaluable to making these productive for all of you. So if you've got areas or subject matters that you want to suggest we include on the agenda, please do. Don't hesitate. We'd be more than happy to do that. We are, as we get our feet underneath this and really feel that we've got the machine running correctly, we're going to start bringing on guest speakers. Folks, my colleague from the Department of Labor. We've got some folks federally that are in grant program management that we'll have. A lot of our internal staff will be some of the initial ones where Diane and Shandana, Rachel and Trevi can kind of walk you through what their office is involved with and answer questions that you may have that don't come up as part of the slideshow. So again, I guess in finality, I just say we are absolutely open to making this a really productive time for all of you. And your feedback can be very helpful towards that. So thank you all for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we're one day away from Friday, so enjoy the weekend once it comes. But thank you all. Again, we couldn't be doing this without you, so thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.